Hey Sopranos fans, and welcome to another episode here on Bully Whispers. By viewer request, we will be starting a series evaluating shows based on Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, and in this episode we will be taking a look at the first law, never outshine the master. According to Greene, this is the worst mistake you can make, even if inadvertently, with it becoming increasingly more important and difficult when dealing with masters who are insecure or have an enormous ego.
You answer me like I'm Jesus Christ himself, and if you fucking lie to me, may your mother die. I can't try the eyes.
Unfortunately for everyone in the Soprano crew, both of their leaders they have to contend with throughout the show possess these traits. So when evaluating how the first law plays out in the Sopranos, we will look not only at Tony and Junior's relationship, but also how other aspects of the law are reflected in characters such as Richie April, Johnny Sack, Muscles Marinara, and Jackie Jr. In further clarifying the first law, Greene expresses that you should always make those above you feel comfortably superior. In your desire to impress them, do not go too far in displaying your talents, or you might accomplish the opposite, inspire fear and insecurity. Make your masters appear more brilliant than they are, and you will attain the heights of power. He then goes on to give examples of people who broke the law, people who followed the law, what keys to power can be learned, and the reversal of the law, all of which we will get into, but the example he used for the breaking of the law was an interesting one. When King Louis XIV of France's prime minister died, the financial minister Nicolas Fouquet expected to be appointed as his replacement, but when the position was abolished instead, Fouquet decided to throw a lavish party at his grandiose estate in an attempt to get back in the king's good graces. Through this party, Fouquet intended to showcase his good taste, connections, and popularity, proving himself to be valuable to the king. It did not go over well. Instead of being impressed, the notoriously insecure king thought that Fouquet was flaunting his influence and wealth at his new home. The next day, he was arrested and ended up spending the rest of his life in prison. While the insecurity of Louis XIV opens up the evaluation of Tony and Junior's relationship, which we will get back to in a bit, let's first take a look at the more direct parallel, Richie showing Tony his new house. In this instance, Richie was intentionally doing what Fouquet inadvertently did, rubbing his wealth in his boss's face without subtlety.
These walls, skim coat. Not that plain sheetrock shit. Not only that, they put on a lawn this year, it's new. When did you put your lawn in?
Yeah, around the time you put in that dance floor for your son to prance around on. At least that's normally the type of sarcastic jab Tony would have responded with.
Your opponent is of choleric temper. Irritate him.
But he was feeling clammy and left shortly thereafter. Either way, Tony was never really threatened by Richie, so we don't see insecurities come into play here in the same way we do with King Louis. The better example of the first law when dealing with insecure leaders, or in this case supposed leaders, is Junior. From the pilot episode, one of the first things we learn about Junior is that he is very insecure, and as a result, it's always difficult to make him feel comfortably superior in the way that the first law dictates. During the period when Junior truly thought he was boss, before finding out about the Capos having their moms in Green Grove, he demonstrates exactly how easy it is to outshine an insecure master. Despite Tony trying to play up Junior as the boss, something as simple as asking Tony's opinion on the upcoming federal indictments angered Junior and disrupted his sense of status.
And what are we going to do? Close shop? We can't do that.
Tony, what do you think?
What the fuck you asking him for? I just gave you the answer.
Interestingly enough, the person who did the best at making Junior feel secure in his position of superiority was someone who was arguably above Junior, Johnny Sack. While technically Junior was the boss of a family and Johnny Sack was an underboss at this point, I think it's fair to say, and let me know if you disagree, that the underboss of a New York family would carry more weight than the boss of a New Jersey family, so the general idea still applies. This means, despite not having to do so, Johnny goes out of his way to make Junior feel like a true Don.
You think I got the balls to drive in from New York and tell your uncle how we should run his family? I shouldn't expect to see the Statue of Liberty again if I did that.
And it works like a charm. The example Robert Greene gives as to someone following the first law is Galileo. Rather than trying to gather bits of money and gifts from many different patrons, as was the custom at the time, he focused entirely on the Medici family, and the strategy worked. The discoveries he attributed to them and the fashion in which he did so made them willing to become his sole sponsor, sparing him the endless begging for support that his peers were subjected to. We see something similar in a mafia context when Richie April attempts to put all his eggs in one basket with Junior.
I'm yours, Junior. Whatever, whoever. You just say it.
Which makes sense because Junior does seem to have a genuine affection for Richie.
You and your brother were always good boys.
But unlike Galileo, Richie was unsuccessful for two main reasons. First, and most obviously, he chose the wrong basket. Junior was never going to come out on top with Tony, but even still, Richie never suspected that Junior would sell him out.
When you're lying in the street in a pool of your own blood, don't say your uncle didn't try to tell you.
What are you talking about?
Richie April is moving against you.
He assumed Junior would be as loyal to him as he was to Junior, and as Robert Greene points out in the first law, the Master can be cold-blooded in their own quest for power, which is a principle that will pop up again later. In evaluating his historical examples, Greene identifies several keys to power, including two rules which must be understood, one of which is to never assume just because the Master loves you that you can do anything you want. He tells the story of a Japanese artist who was born a peasant, but was loved by the emperor so much that he ended up becoming a trusted advisor with an apartment in the palace. Unfortunately for him, he forgot that he wasn't actually nobility and proceeded to act as though he had earned that rank, which ultimately cost him his life. And how can this not bring to mind Jackie Jr.? Jackie Jr. viewed himself as a noble because his father had been boss, but in a mafia context, he really wasn't because he himself was never made. In reality, he was just someone who was loved by royalty, though not as much as he thought, and proceeded to act as though his father was still alive and he was still the Fresh Prince of New Jersey. This unforgivable miscalculation of his own importance, as Robert Greene would call it, quickly cost Jackie Jr. his life in his quest to rise up the mob ladder. The other rule Greene points out is that it's possible to inadvertently outshine the Master simply by being yourself, which brings us to Perry, aka Muscles Marinara. Following his recovery from being shot, Tony is insecure and feels his men are second-guessing him where they hadn't before. He needs to show that he is not weak, and to do so, he decides to pick a fight, but he has to choose the right target. Perry inadvertently outshined everyone in the room just by being in good shape, so Tony took the opportunity to beat him down for no real reason other than to secure his image. As Greene pointed out, Masters are ruthless themselves when it comes to their own rise and maintaining of power, and this brings us to the reversal of the first rule. Greene points out that you can't worry about upsetting everyone, but you must be selectively cruel. If your superior is a falling star, there is nothing to fear from outshining him. Do not be merciful. Your Master had no such scruples in his own cold-blooded climb to the top, which is where Tony and Junior's relationship comes back into play. From the beginning of the series, Junior is a falling star. The majority of the capos are on Tony's side, and as we see through flashbacks, this dates back to when Jackie Sr. was boss. While it's understandable why Tony was attempting to flatter Junior at first, since he wanted Junior to be a lightning rod, he violated this aspect of the first law after the attempted hit on his life. At that point, Tony showed Junior more mercy than he would have anyone else in that position, but would he have if he had known about Junior's own cold-blooded rise to the top, which we now know included the murder of Dickie Moltisanti? My guess is no. Ironically enough, he did handle Junior correctly according to the first law after Junior began to deteriorate mentally, and it got him shot. According to Greene, if your superior is very weak, just let nature take its course because you will look cruel if you pick on a feeble superior. Tony seems to be attempting to do this when he's taking care of Junior towards the end of the series, but it didn't work out well. The last aspect of the reversal is if that your Master is firm in their spot, just be patient and eventually they will be weak. It's at this point that I will bring up the popular fan theory that Patsy Parisi had Tony killed at the end of the series, just to say that if he did, he was the perfect embodiment of this last aspect. Rather than shoot him on the spot when he was feeling the urge, which would have been a certain death sentence, he waited for years, and by the end of the series, if it was him that did it, who would come back at him for it? Tony had very few allies left. Thanks for watching this episode of the 48 Laws series here on Bully Whispers. Since this is a new series and it hasn't settled into its final format yet, if there's anything you would like to see on future episodes, please let me know. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.